So many light years ago, I was a junior at NYU Film School, and I found myself one night, very late, at Studio 54, and I was talking to a friend and said, wouldn't this be a great location for my junior class movie? And that got mentioned to a busboy, and mentioned to a waiter, mentioned to a bartender, and somehow suddenly I was sitting in front of the general manager of Studio 54, Michael Overington, who went on to like run all of Ian Schrager hotels, but at the time was 24 years old and was just himself out of film school at NYU, and so he did a favor and he gave me access to the club for the movie. And I went back to my class and said, everyone has to try to vie to try to get their movie. And I said, I've got a location, Studio 54. And so I got to put together a nice little group of people, including a fantastic woman named Susan Shapiro, who was my camera person for it. And anyway, a million years later, our footage turns out to be the only film footage that was actually shot on location there, because everything else was broadcast video, and even if it was 60 minutes or anything, they just went in with this, high quality at the time, but since then it's deteriorated. Film 16 millimeter film stock doesn't deteriorate if it's kept okay, and it was kept in Susan's house in upstate New York, and so it survived, and we sold the footage maybe about 6 months ago, and put in a little contract that we had that if we could, we put in a contract that if the movie were to debut or premiere anywhere, we would like to go to it. So suddenly we got an invitation to Sundance.
Any royalties or anything like that came with that footage, or was it all included with the contract?
They gave us a flat fee, which was very generous, and we were very surprised. We also agreed not to even question the number and just take it and be very happy with it. But that it wasn't about the money, and again, we never really imagined that there would actually be a premiere, but there is one, so that's what we're going to tomorrow.
How excited are you that something that you shot many years ago is now being brought back into light? And I mean, personally, I'm 24. I never actually heard of Studio 54 before, so you're kind of teaching a new generation about this kind of crazy type nightclub that happened. It closed forever ago.
Yeah, the nightclub was important at the time, because anything that is happening is always important at the time. But over time, we look back and we see that it had elements that were pretty sensational, including that at the time, New York was just coming out of a very, very low moment. And so the world was very ready for something exciting. Disco music was happening. And then, like, the forces of some really powerful people in New York putting together a sensational-looking club that didn't look like anything else, and basically it just kind of burst on the scene with this impact of celebrities like Bianca Jagger rode a white horse into her party for her birthday. Things that just got the attention of everybody in the world. And again, as a young kid, I somehow managed to get in,
I was going to ask you that. How did you get in?
I was just a face in the crowd. The thing I learned about getting in and how did I get in? I was just a face in the crowd. The bottom line is that if you just, there's no bottom line. How did I get in? I was just a face in the crowd, and I got called out, by Steve Rubel or Mark Beneke, whoever was the doorman at the time. And you get called. You have 1 second to appear at the door, and if you're not chosen in that second, you may as well just go home. And it was quite a mob scene every single night there. And
was it really hard to get into it? Was that the thing? Was it?
It was probably the hardest club to get into, and no matter who you were, there was no guarantee. Of course, if you are, one of the Mick Jagger, you're going to get in. And it wasn't just for celebrities. It was about a mix of people, and they were creating a mix at the door. And that's why you would see people, a whole cross section of New York put together in this room for an exciting night. And so you were in a mob scene outside. You got called in, you walked through this dark corridor that was very, very dark. And then all of a sudden, pow, you're in this room. And the energy and the feeling of getting in there was at least half of it. So the movie that we shot, the idea was to show in 15 minutes what this experience was like, because as a location, it was more than a location, it was actually the star of the movie. And it was about trying to get in, it was about being outside, it was being in this insane crowd of just people pushing and calling Steve's name and saying, I'm on the list, and just putting their hand up, and each time they put their hand up, they're hoping that that's the one time that they're gonna get noticed, but it doesn't happen after you're spotted. So we made a big deal about spending time outside and being in the crowd and trying to like figure out what that psychology was like for the people. Like, you know, no one wanted to admit defeat, but it happened pretty instantly if you didn't get called right in. Then the idea of going into the club was all about you know, just like the celebration that night. And so the music was cool, but you also saw celebrities, and celebrities weren't interfered with, and everybody was just partying.
Partying hard too, right? That was like the whole thing behind it, was that there were drugs involved, and then this was many years ago, but there were drugs involved, and there was like a lot of that was like a lot of the stigma surrounding the club. That, can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't think that there was anything unique about drugs in Studio 54 versus like Miami in the Coconut Grove Hotel or any other place, including Paris or London. I mean, drugs were part of the scene at the time. You know, this was like in a pre-AIDS era, and we saw how that all ended up not so great. So I mean, it did have its payback, but at the time it was a pure escape. And the music, if you listen to disco music, you know, and it's antique now, but it's pretty wildly produced, and you had hits that people knew in the clubs that were not even played on the radio, and so you had a very large disco following.